Well, we've reached the 31st of December 2024, New Year's Eve, the last day of the year. And New Year's should be a time of reflection and looking at the positive things in life and trying to take forward a positive attitude to 2025. Now, I know that's hard with all the drama going on around the world, but we have some news outlets, these climate change alarmists, especially the Guardian, typical, putting out their misinformation to try and scare people, scare gullible people that are ignorant of history, ignorant of data, and ignorant of the facts. Now, the Guardian are running this headline over the New Year's, saying 2024 was the most costly climate disasters, killed 2,000 people and caused 229 billion in damages. Well, of course, every death from a climate disaster is an absolute tragedy. But you've got to put that 2,000 in context. Just screaming 2,000 deaths to try and get a headline without putting it in a context over history is misleading. And in fact, if we look at what's happened with deaths from climate disasters over the past 100 years, we see an absolutely dramatic decline, to realise that we've never been safer. This generation has never been safer from climate disasters. In fact, we've never been safer than at any time in human history. If you look at the data, over the last century, the average number of deaths from climate disasters has been around 200,000. So that 2,000 that the Guardian are screaming their headline about represents 1% of the average number of deaths over the last century from climate disasters. In fact, although it's, as I said, every death is a tragedy, we should be celebrating that low number of deaths, given the historic number of deaths we've seen from climate disasters. And when it comes to economic losses, well, 229 billion sounds a huge number, but again, you've got to put that in context. That is about 0.2% of the global GDP for 2024, 0.2%. And if you look at the data, you look at the insurance loss data over the last 30 years, it shows that the economic losses that we are having from climate disasters is actually declining. Things are actually getting better. Insurance losses as a percentage of GDP are trending downwards. Now you can see in the graph here, they varied from under 0.1% to above 0.45%. But the trend you can see is clearly a downwards trend. Things are not getting worse as the Guardian and these climate alarmists continue to go on about. But they're not the only parameters that we should look at how we should be rejoicing about how much safer and better our climate is today. Next, have a look at the number of cyclones, both severe and non-severe, in the Australian region that have been measured since the 1970s. And again, probably our most deadly form of climate disaster, tropical cyclones, is actually declining downwards, both the severe and non-severe cyclones. This is very good news, but don't ever expect the Guardian or the ABC to report that fact. Next, the Great Barrier Reef has been one for scare campaigns for the climate alarmists. But again, the data shows the exact opposite. For 2024 was actually one of the best years on record since they've been measuring of the amount of coral cover on the Great Barrier Reef. So all the gloom and doom that we had of previous years about the trajectory of after some severe cyclones and a few bleachings, that the coral cover was in depletion and the Great Barrier Reef was dying. In 2024, the coral cover was never higher. Again, something you'll never hear reported by the Guardian or the ABC. And then, of course, there's the global greening. If you asked any school children, they would tell you that deforestation is a terrible problem. Well, the facts are there are more trees and plant life on the planet today than there was when I left high school. In fact, the data shows, the satellite data shows, that this century, the increase in the amount of green leaf matter on the planet is the size of the continental USA. There's been a massive increase in greening of the planet. And yet we've got gullible school children being told the exact opposite in their schools. Then, of course, let's not forget the polar bears. The polar bear numbers are actually increasing. Once a icon of the alarmists, the polar bears were all meant to die out and the numbers were meant to be decreasing. Well, the best data shows the polar bear numbers are actually increasing. Then we come across to the next one to look at is crop yields. Now, crop yields, the productivity of a hectare of land, is something that the alarmists like to say, the food supply is all in danger. Well, if you look at the data, for almost every single crop, whether it be wheat, barley, corn, potatoes or rice, every single one we're seeing a very substantial increase in crop yields. Again, the exact opposite of the alarmists, and something truly to celebrate. And many of you are old enough, would remember the global cooling scare of the 1970s. Remember this episode with Leonard Nimoy commentating.
In 1977, the worst winter in a century struck the United States. Arctic cold gripped the Midwest for weeks on end. Great blizzards paralyzed cities of the Northeast. One desperate night in Buffalo, 8 people froze to death in marooned cars.
I think that if we had to go through a real bad winter, just like we just went through, I think we'd have to think about moving someplace else.
Move where? The brutal Buffalo winter might become common all over the United States. Climate experts believe the next ice age is on its way. According to recent evidence, it could come sooner than anyone had expected.
Questions that I'm frequently asked is, when will this present warm interval end? And the best answer to that probably is that it has in fact already ended, and it ended 3,000 years ago right here on Baffin Island.
Dr. Gifford Miller is a glaciologist from the University of Colorado. He's been studying the climate and glaciers of Baffin Island for the past 6 years.
For the last 3,000 years, the summer temperatures have been getting colder, and the amount of precipitation, rainfall and snowfall has decreased, so that the conditions have been drier and colder. And at the same time, the glaciers have expanded. In the most recent expansion, which occurred between 300 years ago and the turn of the present century, the glaciers attained their most extensive positions that they had during the last 8,000 years.
Ernie Sieber is superintendent of Baffin Island National Park and has lived in the Arctic for over 20 years.
We had, in 1973, we had ice all over at the East Coast. The fjords, some of the ice in the fjords didn't even leave. And almost every year since, we had ice moving in and out of the fjords. So it looks like the climate has changed. It looks like it turned colder.
Since concern for our weather has increased, the park wardens now take daily records of temperatures, wind, and solar radiation. Weather data from stations all over the Arctic is collected and fed into central computers. Balloons are launched every day to monitor the winds and temperatures at high altitudes. The data shows that average temperatures in the Arctic have fallen dramatically over the last 30 years. In most locations, the drop has been about 2 degrees centigrade. At that rate, the descent to ice age temperatures could take less than 200 years. It is not only the lonely Arctic that has cooled. The whole northern hemisphere is growing steadily colder.
Well, as the best scientific data from the Lancet shows, that it's cold that we should fear. Cold weather causes 9 times more deaths around the world than warm weather. So we should be rejoicing that we've had that increase in warmth since those threats of a little ice age coming back in the 1970s. And in fact, if you look at the recent data, you can actually see that the warmth that we are enjoying today is actually beneficial and is saving lives. Again, something you'll never see or hear from the ABC or The Guardian. And then, of course, there's the Pacific Islands, which were all meant to be going under from rising sea levels. Well, the latest peer-reviewed science looked at used satellite images over the last 50 years to look at over 500 Pacific adult islands, and they showed a net increase, not a decrease, a net increase of 443 hectares. So those Pacific islanders are not sinking. The islands are not getting smaller. They're actually growing in size. Again, the exact opposite what the alarmists told us, and more good news. And finally, there's bushfires, a staple of the Australian summer. Now, while alarmists like to say that the world is burning and the world is on fire, again, the data shows the exact opposite. Whether it's Australia or around the world, the area lost to bushfires and wildfires is declining. The trend is clearly downwards. Yes, you'll have spikes up and down, but the trend is clearly downwards. Less area is being lost to wildfire. And in fact, this year, 2004, again is another year below average for wildfires in Australia and throughout most of the world. So as we wrap up 2024, there's no need for this climate alarmism, this mindless alarmism, this anti-science, this hysteria that ignores all the facts and the data. Almost every parameter that we can measure shows that our climate is improving. We should go into 2025 with confidence that we are living probably at the best time in human history for climate. And yet we've got these scaremongering people out frightening little children, telling them that the world is going to end, that the seas are going to boil and the oceans are going to rise and they're all going to burn up to a crisp. The data shows the exact opposite. By every parameter that you measure, we are living at one of the best times in human history when it comes to the climate. The biggest issues that we face is climate alarmism, mindless alarmism that ignores the facts and takes us on this destructive path of this insane net zero that is meant to somehow or other think that CO2 is a control knob that will give us better weather. Well, as the data shows, we're already getting substantially better weather. So going into 2025, let's put this nonsense away. Let's follow the data, let's follow the science, and let's appreciate the great time in human history that we live. Probably the best ever climate that any generation in human history has enjoyed.